Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Dark Ages podcast, the Sandby Borg Massacre. So I know you were all expecting the second part of Brunhilde's story, but it's not ready yet because I'm terrible at managing my time, and I think we all knew this already. So instead, let me offer you this bonus episode. Bonus in the sense it has no relationship to the other episodes around it and won't be as long as your usual episode. It is in its way also appropriate to a Christmas tradition, because it's a kind of ghost story. And I have to warn you at the outset that there are not a lot of gags. What I'm going to talk about is an archaeological site in Sweden called Sandby Borg. Sandby Borg is a ruined fortification dated to the end of the 5th century. It sits on an island overlooking the Baltic Sea. It is not the largest, oldest, or best preserved fort of the time on said island. What makes Sandby Borg unique is the massacre that took place there. The remains of at least 26 individuals have been identified so far, and given that less than 20% of the site has been excavated, the actual number is almost certainly more. All of the bodies show signs of violent, traumatic death. None of them were buried. They were left where they fell. There are children, including one young child between 2 and 5 years old, and one infant of about 2 months. The remains skew male. Only one adult woman has been firmly identified, but a significant portion of the bones belong to individuals too young to be easily gendered. There are animal remains too, some slaughtered presumably by the fort's inhabitants, some killed and left behind, including a few horses, and some which may have starved for lack of human care. Let me back up and set the scene a bit, shall I? The island of Öland lies a few miles off the coast of Sweden, a barrier island, 85 miles long and about 10 miles wide at its widest point. That's 137 by 16 kilometers, if you want to know. It's a decently sized scrap of territory, the second largest island in Sweden after Gotland, which lies about 150 miles or so to the east. Öland is fairly sheltered by the mainland and has been inhabited by humans off and on for 10,000 years. The bit we're interested in lies about a third of the way up the island's eastern coast. Sandby Borg is a ring fort, which is exactly what it sounds like. An oval wall encloses an area about 90 meters long and 60 meters wide, roughly the size of an American football field. Today the wall is mostly ruined, standing a meter or two high, but once stood 4 meters, or 14 feet, and was about the same in thickness. It was built in dressed local stone on the outer surfaces, with a rubble fill inside. The wall enclosed a tightly clustered group of 53 small buildings, interpreted as houses. Most of these were arranged radially, with the defensive wall forming their back wall, and another block of houses in the middle forming a street in between with doors opening onto it. 3 of the buildings have been fully excavated, with some exploratory digging elsewhere. I've mentioned already this is not the only ring fort on Öland. 15 have been identified, and Sandby Borg is pretty typical in form. All date to roughly the same time period, the 5th century. The ring fort appears across northern Europe, in Ireland especially, where they're very common, Great Britain, and in Scandinavia. Their purpose is still debatable, and they may indeed have had more than one function, and their functions may have differed depending on where they were built. I'll get back to that in a little bit. When death overtook the inhabitants of Sandby Borg, no one came back to bury the dead. No one came to clean up or reoccupy the site. In effect, time there stopped. It's like a miniature Pompeii in that way, as the remains of daily life are there to be found, catalogued, interpreted, and perhaps understood. A collection of lamb bones piled together indicate they had been recently slaughtered and prepared for eating, which places the massacre sometime in the late spring or summer. Rye and mustard seeds suggest what may have accompanied the meat. The mustard at Sandby is the earliest example of the herb in Scandinavia. Aside from the people, the archaeologists have found a range of artifacts, including a surprising number of what they would call high-status items. 5 brooches, intricately shaped in silver and gilded, have been found, along with beads of glass and silver, a sword pendant, just as finely shaped and decorated as the brooches, and a gold solidus of Valentinian III, 425 to 455, which helps to date the site. Aside from the sword pendant, very little military gear has been found. Just a spear point and a handful of arrowheads. Signs of clothing, like belt furnishings or clasps, are also largely absent. What there is, like the brooches, was found together with other value objects, likely hidden in caches. The brooches in particular are gorgeous pieces of work, and I will put pictures on Instagram. They were probably produced nearby, but other items, especially a large Millefiori glass bead and obviously the coin, were produced inside the Roman Empire. Öland is exceptional in Sweden for the amount of Roman gold that has been found there. More than 360 solidi are known from the island. The distance from the frontier isn't surprising. Roman coins are found as far away as Kazakhstan and Sri Lanka, carried there by long-distance trade and passing through many, many hands. The gold found on Öland is different. It tends to be in nearly mint condition, as if it was carried there directly, not passed by traders. And their volume and concentration on Öland begins to give some idea of what the people of Sandby Borg were doing, and maybe what happened to them. The largest influx of gold appears to have been in the early to middle 5th century and then tailed off rapidly after the significant date of 476. It's possible that Öland was a jumping off point for mercenary or raiding bands, bound for service or plunder with the Romans, and either could become the other depending on circumstances. In either way, Roman gold would have made its way back to Öland, concentrated as bands arrived, counted their earnings, spent them, and then continued on to wherever home was. In the context of migration period Sweden, the ring forts may have served then as rally points, or hiring centers. With a large number of men with ready cash in one place, they would also naturally have become nodes of trade. Alternatively, they could have been built primarily as trading centers, designed by local elites to capture and control the flow of goods from across the sea. Many ring forts, especially in Ireland, appear to have been mainly agricultural, a center of a large farmstead housing the landowner and his immediate family and dependents, along with space for work and livestock. My opinion here counts for nothing, but in the case of Sandby Borg, I'm inclined to favor the mercenary raider idea for two main reasons, and I am not at all standing against the weight of general scientific opinion here. First, the preponderance of males among the dead suggests that this was not a place of permanent residence. The one female and infant may have been servants, slaves, or prisoners, but there seems to be no sign of the complete family structure that you would expect for a permanent farmstead. Second, the number of buildings inside the walls, to me, argues against the agricultural or marketplace idea. There is no space within the fort for a significant amount of livestock, and driving them through the narrow street would have been difficult. Likewise, there seems to be no central market area where people could conveniently gather to trade with each other. If Öland was indeed an economic center of trade, mercenaries, raiders, or all three, then it had competition. After 476, the amount of gold flowing out of the west and into the pockets of Scandinavians would have been reduced significantly. The pie would shrink, and the competition to grab a piece of it would have intensified in inverse proportion. Put another way, Öland was suddenly full of unemployed fighting men with no way to make a living. A power struggle over dwindling resources could have fueled the violence that consumed Sandby Borg. That violence does not in any way suggest a battle. Bodies were found in houses and in the street. 9 individuals were found in House 40, which has been fully excavated, including the child and the infant. 4 of the skulls show signs of blunt force trauma. The same is found in bodies elsewhere. There is also evidence of fire in House 40, either accidental or deliberately set, but it did not spread and burned itself out fairly quickly. Elsewhere, a man was found partially burned where he fell across a hearth, but again, the fire did not spread, and he was likely dead when he fell. Trauma was mainly from blows aimed at the heads, necks, and shoulders of the victims. Almost no defensive wounds have been identified, as would be expected in a case of active combat. Under normal circumstances, an assault on a place like Sandby Borg would have been met by defenders who would have been injured in predictable ways, with wounds on the forearms, hands, faces. No injuries of that type have been found on these bodies. After the attack, the livestock, the horses in particular, would normally be rounded up and taken as spoils. Most of the women and children most likely would be spared death and taken instead as slaves. After danger had passed, someone, relatives or neighbors who had escaped the disaster, would have returned, collected the bodies, and disposed of them. In the tradition of the time and place, a coin might have been placed in the mouths as a toll to smooth the passage to the afterlife. And none of that happened at Sandby Borg. That's actually not quite true. Objects were found in the mouths of some, but not coins. In a gesture which shouts across the gulf of time, sheep's teeth were placed in the mouths of 2 of the victims. We don't need to understand the subtleties of the local religion to know that this was a grotesque expression of contempt. It further suggests that the abandonment of the fort was decreed, that neighbors and relations were forbidden to bury the dead and reoccupy the site. And if that is the case, then the perpetrators were most likely local, with the power to enforce such an injunction. Whatever happened at Sandby Borg was, in the words of archaeologist Helena Victor, really, really ugly treatment. The command to avoid Sandby prevailed in the years immediately following the massacre, and then the ugliness took on its own dissuading weight. It would not be outrageous to suggest that the place gained a reputation for bad luck in the generations after the massacre, the way that murder houses acquire stories of hauntings. The taboo against disturbing the ruins may have persisted long after the turf roofs collapsed and the wooden gates rotted away, long after any memory of what exactly had happened there was left. Older locals from nearby Gordby village remember their parents telling them not to play near the Borg, and ghost stories center on the ruins and local churchyard. Regardless of supernatural echoes, we can never know exactly what happened at Sandby Borg. We can only guess. We can guess that a group of fighting men overwhelmed the settlement, perhaps at night. We can see from the skeletons that remain that those inside had little time to defend themselves, and were bludgeoned to death wherever they were found, in the street, in their houses. In one house, a young man stumbled over the body of another already dead and fell backward over him before being finished off with a blow to the head. His feet still rest across the abdomen of his fallen companion. The attackers killed the horses and left them, passing up the chance of lucrative plunder, and they ignored the dogs. Then they left. They barred the gates behind them, leaving the dogs eventually to starve and the bodies to putrefy, until the ones inside were covered by collapsed roofs and the mud swallowed the ones in the street. The fort remained a silent hulk by the coast, until the memory of what had happened there faded and the walls crumbled. The fall of the empire had rippled outward, perhaps reaching as far as this quarter of Sweden. Warriors desperate and in need were pushed into conflict that quickly became savage and led to atrocity. And if I may put aside the historian's detachment for a moment, I can only hope that the excavations and reconstruction of the lives that were lived and lost at Sandby Borg might go some way to laying their ghosts. I hope that all wasn't too grim for you. Part 2 of Brunhilde will follow before New Year. I hope the holidays are as peaceful and full of light as they can be. Until next time, take care of yourselves and of each other. And God Jul to you and your families.